Hello everyone, Coach Carol here, and today I'm going to be talking about some of my recent tips for writing your ancestral stories. So I'm just getting organised here, but I can see that Val's joined us today. Hi Val.
Hi Carol, lovely to meet you again, even online over the miles.
Indeed, it is lovely. Yes, I've just turned off my cover image, which is kind of like a holding ground for these live casts, and that I can put in place, but I haven't yet found out how to add a background for myself, and so we'll just go with what we have today.
Indeed.
And so I'm going to share my slides. Can you see those yet?
Not yet.
Okay, let's make sure that they are happening. Share. They were sharing, but now I can share again and choose the application window and the slides. Can you see them now?
I can, yes.
Excellent. All right. So the way this one works in StreamYard is it just puts us beside the slides, just like you would in Zoom. And I'm just going to walk through some of the things that we discovered last week. Or was it just this week? My goodness.
This week.
This week, indeed, it's been quite momentous in the last few days. So as you know, but I'll just fill in for our audience that I've been researching my cutting line, which is my maternal ancestors, and using some of the information from Find My Past and getting some help from friends along the way. And the tips today are about how to use what you've found or the resources and build them into a story. So I have some of those images here to share with you. And I have Val to thank for this baptism picture for my grandfather, Charles Harry Newland, cutting. And the reason this particular image was important was to make sure that we had the right man to be my grandfather and my great-grandfather. So Charles Harry Newland was born in February 1878, and you can see his record right at the bottom of the baptism. I'm not sure if I can expand this at all. That's the only drawback here, so I'm hoping you can see it. And we'll notice that at the bottom, the parents are Harry and Emma. And for years, I'd always thought that the parents of Charles Harry Newland was another Charles and a Sarah. So this has unraveled one part of the mystery for me. And now I can go on and write a story with more facts for the parents of my grandfather. So in order to bring that to light, we needed to do quite a bit of research, or at least Val did on my behalf, to find that baptism record, which was very important so that we could then go and look for the marriage certificate for his parents and make sure we were on the right track, which was the next step along the way. I'm just getting a bit of feedback there. I'm not sure where that's coming from. So the marriage certificate then verifies the fact that these are my great-grandparents, and the story that one could weave into this would be how we had discovered their existence, who their parents were, and then stretch back to yet another generation. I noticed that the father's name is John Cutting for my great-grandfather, and for my great-grandmother, her father's name was Charles. So now we can begin to look at another story, especially when we look at the professions of those two people. John Cutting is a carpenter and Charles Newland was a cordwainer. Now, Val, you told me the other day what a cordwainer does. Maybe you could fill in for me.
They are something to do with shoemaking, a particular part, and I can't remember whether they were, I need to look it up again to refresh my memory, whether they were the shoe menders or they actually made the shoes.
Okay.
I would need to just check that up again, exactly.
Yes.
To do with the shoe and boot industry, yes.
Wonderful. So that then leads me to another little tip. So when you're beginning to write the story for that particular ancestor, we would have to do more research and go and find out what a cordwainer did in around about the 1860s through to the 1890s, most likely, or even before that, because these are the parents for this marriage that took place in 1867. So we are able to go from, say, maybe 1850 through to 1890 for his occupation, depending on how long they lived. So it's another way to uncover a little tip for writing up the story. So with that in mind, then we could look at the other end of their lives and find more information about where their final resting place is. And with a trip over to Billion Graves, we found this particular gravestone, which is very hard to read. And there's a little bit of a transcript there for you on the right-hand side. But this becomes another story to tell, because at the bottom of this headstone, I'm pretty sure there's a third person mentioned. When I zoomed in and had a closer look, it was very faint, but there's someone else there. And so I want to know who that person is. And enhancing the picture of the gravestone was one thing that I tried using my heritage, but it still didn't make that final bit at the end very clear. So further research required. Have you had things like this before with gravestones and headstones, Val?
Yes, often over the passage of time, it becomes very hard to read what's on a headstone. And there are numerous hints out there in internet land on how to go about reading some of these stones using lights and mirrors and at certain times of day. Some people advocate using talcum powder that you put all over the stone and then wash off and that sort of thing, but then others say, no, don't do that. The talcum powder then gets into the stone. So, yeah, you have to be careful. But the one with lights and mirrors seems to be quite a good one. Although that's going to be a bit hard for you, Carol, seeing as you're here and that's over there.
Absolutely. This is a graveyard in Kingston in Surbiton, United Kingdom. So, yes, a little hard for me to get there. But your suggestion the other day was great. Maybe there's someone in my family who could go there and get a closer look at this particular headstone. And then that becomes another way to fulfill another story, especially for this couple. So I'm going to move on. And I wanted to bring this one up because it was such a revelation this week. I had been searching for information about this ancestor who is a great uncle. So he was the brother of Harry, I think, yes. I get mixed up sometimes. But Andrew Ralph Cutting, I was always told that he was an opera singer. That was just one of those pieces of information that came through in the family from my cousins. So she had one black and white photo of Andrew, and I did the colorization over at My Heritage and picked up more of his features, which became really useful when we got to the next point, for which I have Val to thank for finding the details for his stint in the Mikado in 1924, and I managed to get a little image from the site. And if you look closely at the tall gentleman in the back row, you may be able to see the resemblance, even though he's in full makeup for his role in the Mikado. I'm not sure if he has had any other performances, so it's still a bit of research to be done. But I think it was more in the line of a hobby for him. And as you pointed out, Val, his work was as an insurance surveyor. the company that put on the Mikado was called the Alliance Assurance Dramatic Society. So maybe this was just a hobby for them. And when I looked deeper into that particular society, I don't think they went any further than 1924. So that could be why we can't find any more information about them. But the whole point of this is that this becomes a whole separate story about Andrew, and I need to weave in some details about what it might have been like to be an amateur opera singer, especially in one of my favourite shows from Gilbert and Sullivan. So that we found by going to, remind me the name of the paper, Val?
It was the portrait came from the National Portrait Gallery. It was a link that some very kind person had found and put up in your post in the genealogy squad, wasn't it? And someone had found one and put it there, and then it was in the National Portrait Gallery, so therefore there was a date to it. So by using the date and the name of the company, that then was able to come up on the Find My Past newspaper page, and that brought it up. And when we tried putting in just his name as Andrew Cutting, it brought up 4 million results, because everyone had newspaper cuttings and they were cutting scenes and they were having cuts of funding and all of this thing. So it was very hard to pin down any reference to him as a singer. And that's why it was finally using the name of the company that we were able to pinpoint it. And that was in that, you'd found that previously.
Oh, I just remembered. It's the name of the paper called The Stage.
The Stage, yes.
And I've since gone on to find there are many other newspapers and gazettes that focus on the performing arts.
Yes.
So it's another lead for us to go into to find any more information.
They just may not be digitised yet and available.
It certainly alerted me to another way to build in more of the story by following unusual newspapers. Was certainly something that I hadn't known about before. No one else in my family has been on the stage, as far as I know, but having access to the stage makes interesting reading. And you were able to find an article that actually talked about the way in which Andrew was given accolades for his performance on that particular occasion.
In the big scheme of things, it might have been his one and only stage performance. We don't know. No,
true. However, the importance of the photos makes a very important point for how to illustrate your story when you come to write it up. The research is one half. And if you've got an image, and we're so lucky to have this one, it makes it so rich and colourful. And so using your photos well is another tip for writing your stories. I then went on to look at some further family ancestors for whom we had black and white photos only. And in this particular case, this is an uncle who was my mother's brother, one of twins. And when the twins were born, one of them was farmed out to an auntie. I guess at the time it was a little too hard for the mother to cope. So Frank was the one who spent most of his life living with Auntie Edie. And so that becomes another story. Why did that happen? You know, we dig deeper now and find out some of the reasons, especially the putting it into context in that historical era. That's 1901. And I knew that later on, after having twins, she had my mum, and then later had triplets. So it would become quite difficult to be managing a large family like that. So I thought I would be able to write a story about Frank's life with Auntie Edie. And here she is. Her full name, Edith Mary Robertson, she was the sister to my grandmother, obviously gave Frank his start in life. And she lived on to a great age of 90s. I only remember information about her from my siblings and my cousins. I don't remember her specifically. So I would like to dig deeper into why Auntie Edie might have taken Frank. Because I think the story goes there that she had no children of her own. She did marry, and she married Charles Howell, and he was Welsh. So that leads me into another little story that I could be telling about the Welsh, which is one of my favourite ways to go. So collaborating with others is an important part of getting your story. And I collaborated with my cousins and with Val to get the data. This particular photo that could be used for yet another story is of my grandmother, Mary Jane, sister to Edith. And my cousin identified the man standing behind her as grandfather Charles. But to me, he looks a little too young to be the husband of Mary Jane, because that would make him Charles Harry Newland. I'm not sure that that's who it is. So I need to dig a little deeper there and collaborate with my other cousin to find out for sure. And I love the way that Grandma's sitting in an old-fashioned deck chair in the garden, but dressed to the nines. What was the occasion for this particular photo? What was happening? So yet another way to tell a story. And this one was a revelation for me. Another shared photo from a cousin, black and white only, and I'd never seen it before. Whatever reason, when you're visiting with cousins, you don't always sit down around the table and look at old photographs in albums. We used to years ago, but not these days. And this one she identified as being our grandmother, Mary Jane Robinson, with her parents, who were George and Mary Robinson. And I'm surmising that the younger lady on the right-hand side might be the daughter. What do you think, Val? How would you pick out the daughter and the mother?
They're both quite young looking, aren't they? But I would say that, yes, Mary Jane is sitting down next to her father and the mother is standing behind them. Is that what you are looking at?
That's what I surmised also. And I was intrigued with how much George Robinson looks like one of the kings. Was it King George VI? Because of that style of beard and
yes, I think that was fashionable around that time period too.
And then look deeper into costumes. There's another way to build it into the story. This is obviously a staged photo. It's not a casual one. It's obviously been done in a studio, I think. And they are dressed.
They're in their Sunday best, Carol.
I think that's a good way to describe it. It's their Sunday best, yes.
Yes.
So a really nice story can come out of that one as well. So the tips that I was looking for today, sort of, if I summarize, you begin with a purpose. Why are you telling the story? And then you look for the details to write something that's of interest. Is it compelling? Who else would be wanting to read this story or listen to it? Then how can you collaborate with others to fill out and build a bridge between the gaps in our knowledge and building some of the gaps from the historical context, what was happening around that time? And digging deeper for details means looking in different places, such as the stage newspaper, and certainly looking at gravestone headstones. So all of these tips I'm weaving together as a way for our people who are keen to tell stories to think about when beginning the process of writing the story. So I think that's the last photo in my batch. Let me just check. It is. So I will stop sharing that one right now. So these were my tips today, and I have you to thank for some of the details. Thanks, Val.
Oh, that's all right, Carol. I think sometimes you are blinded to what's in front of you, and it needs another fresh set of eyes to look at it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So
and
thank you for joining me.
Yeah, can see things that you take for granted or just accepted as fact for so long.
Indeed.
And yeah, that's good. Happy to help.
So now we come to the end of the streaming. So I'll just put my card up again. And then we end the broadcast.